So, good evening. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. I'm Anna Yang. I am the Executive Director of Sustainability Accelerator, and I'll be your host tonight, and also the chair. So thank you. We have a really exciting, really interesting conversation today about reinventing sneaker. And then it's called Will Shoes Have a Regenerative Future? So tonight is going to be not Chatham House rule. So please, so the event will be recorded. Please share on Twitter, share on social media, on your impressions and discussions and reflections that you may have. So this is a hybrid model. So we will have interaction with the panel, so the plenary here, but also with the participants joining us online today. We have speakers joining us in person, but we also have some speakers joining us online. So I'll try to also keep track on conversations going on the Q&A. But before I do that, and I invite the speakers to join, I will hand over to Michaela, who's been doing quite a lot of research on this, so that she can talk us through why we have to rethink and reinvent sneakers. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Anna, for your introduction, and also for open the floor for the conversation tonight. If we can put some slides, I'm just going to quickly introduce you to our Reinventing series. Perfect, yes. So we started the Reinventing series in 2017, and since then, next slide, please. Great. We have been bringing together business leaders, policymakers, innovators, to talk to the public audience about new designs, technologies, and solutions that could better meet future social and environmental needs. So past session we hosted were around fashion, plastic bottles, buildings, meat, and during the pandemic we also had Reinventing meetings and air travel. And today we have Reinventing sneakers. So we are diving deeper into the fashion world with a specific focus on the footwear sector, which is a fast-growing sector, but is still a bit under-investigated in terms of future trajectories and also on the impact of both people and the planet. So next slide. So why sneakers? Because to me, sneakers are everywhere. It is really hard for me to imagine a time in recent history where sneakers were not there. So they were once the symbol of athletes, but now are more like cultural icons. And to really understand the rise of the sneakers culture, we have to go back in time to realize that their ubiquity is really enduring the test of time like very few other items, and they dominate the consumer market. So we have to go back to the 1830s when John Dunlop created the first sport shoes. Then, fast forwarding ourselves in the 1970s, 1980s, we will see that two footwear giant manufacturers, Adidas and Nike, are the ones that really transformed the sneakers industry, moving from just commodities to items of desire. And it is during these years that sneakers design has been shaped by the emergence of the underground culture by hip hop and basketball. Yet, I will also argue, slide before, please. I will also argue that there is a very specific moment in time where sneakers reached a whole new level in the public sphere, which is in 1984 with the launch of the Nike Air Jordan in collaboration with the basketball superstar Michael Jordan. And I'm stressing on this point, not just because I think that was a great marketing strategy, but also because in that very specific moment in time, sneakers became statements. They became a way to convey hopes and aspiration. They became agents for social change. So to reinvent the future of sneakers, we have to understand what happened there. Because it's the popularity of sneakers during those years that really created the market with the exponential growth that we are experiencing now. So moving to the present days, and the next slide, please. In 2020, the global sneakers market was valued around 56 billion, and it's predicted to grow up to 85 by 2026. Also, last year, we hit a new record of pair of shoes produced in a year, which was over 24 million pairs. Also, out of curiosity, during my research, I found out that in March 2021, Jordan and Yeezy have officially reached the investment class status. So all this information I'm giving you is for you to get a sense of what it means living in the era of the unstoppable sneakers culture. So next slide, please. Because we should also be aware of the environmental impact of the shoes we walk in. An MIT study revealed that a pair of running shoes causes approximately 14 kilograms of CO2, which is quite impressive to me if we think that sneakers are not that advanced as products, because they do not require any power-related elements in it, yet they produce a lot of carbon emissions. And moving to the next slide, we'll see with a supply chain overview that most of the emissions actually comes from the manufacturing process, which accounts for 9.5%. And moving to the next slide, with a sneaker's anatomy, we can also realize that most of the emission comes from the upper part for 41%, which is followed by the midsole and then the outsole. And of course, we kind of know that sneakers is also made of plastic or plastic-related materials. So in the next slide, you can also see that most of the emissions comes from polyurethane and polyesters, and then follow from for all the other materials. Yet, despite this big environmental impact, next slide, please. I do believe that there are entry points to really reinvent the future of sneakers, and this is part of the groundbreaking works that more and more designers, innovators, business leaders are advancing, be it through design, experimenting with new design techniques and practices, with new materials like bio-based materials such as apple and mushroom, but also with supply chains interventions, meaning with more and more industry-wide collaboration with non-profit organizations and international organizations to protect worker rights and increase supply chain transparency. So really, to me, I believe that sustainable future for sneakers, it is possible. And if we are here tonight, it's just because maybe out of curiosity, we want to know what a sustainable future for sneakers might look like, or we are strong believer of that. And I will also add that, to me, it lies within the sneakers culture itself. We shouldn't be looking anywhere else, but should land in the high-performance, low-impact space, where to me, style and nature can really go hand in hand. So with this positive end note, I'm opening the floor again to our fantastic lineup of speakers. But before we do that, we would like to interact a bit with the audience. So we will do a Slido activity, yes. So you have the Wi-Fi and the passwords on the screen, I believe. So please go on slido.com and insert the code that you see on the screen and kindly fill the survey. We have 3 questions for you, and then we will comment on the questions after the first bit of the panel discussion.
So thank you, Michaela. In the meantime, so for our first panel, so we have 2 panels. For our first panel, I would like to invite Dr. Naomi, sorry, Naomi, I should have checked your last name first, Brathwaite. And we also have Danielle Neveda joining us online and Jessica Saunders. So would you please join us here? So thank you for joining us here. So each one of you will have roughly around 5 minutes, and I'll ask Naomi to start, then I'll hand to Danielle, and then to Jessica, and then we'll open up for Q&A. Naomi, over to you.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to see you all. I'm going to be talking tonight about my research, where I really look at the impact that sneakers have on the people that desire them, covet them, and wear them. So is it possible to have the first slide? Perfect, thank you. So as a researcher, I have a long-held fascination with the power of shoes as objects of cultural and individual expression. As you know, sneakers or other shoes, as worn objects, they have such a profound effect on the wearer, impact gestures, on the posture, on the body, on movement, and beyond their aesthetic surface, they have so much meaning from how they feel and what that means to the experience of the wearer and the sense of their self, experience of life. So that's really always underpins the research that I do. So 4 years ago, I set up the project you can see there, Shoe and Tell. I set it up as a longitudinal study to really examine this relationship between footwear and identity, with a particular focus of looking at teenagers and young people, because the world we live in is so complex and so uncertain and so image-led. And that age from 16 onwards is such an important part of, transition, identity experimentation and formation. So for me to be able to understand more about that through my research, and certainly through the medium of the compelling object of footwear, was really exciting. Could I have a slide change, please? Thank you. So I ground my study in visual ethnography. I photograph my participants in their shoes, and I interview them about what the shoes mean to them, how they feel when they wear them, how they came to own them, the experiences they've had in them. So the shoe is really a lens for understanding about identity, but so much more: values, family, memories, and so on. So whilst I started my project, I never intended to focus on a specific footwear item. Certainly for me, sneakers has been the predominant object that I have photographed and interviewed about for the last 4 years. So could I have a slide change, please? So I've interviewed over 500 participants between the ages of 16 and the early 20s. And it's been amazing to hear the kind of emotive stories of what sneakers mean to them as to why they wear them. So I always ask them, what do your shoes say about you? And can I have another slide change, please? Thank you. So the desire to be individual is a really important finding from my work with individuals and sneakers. Sneaker has such a powerful role, and these two were a really great example because they were friends. They came to the interview together, and for both of them it was so important and emotive to be individual, yet they were wearing quite similar footwear styles, but actually what the sneaker was fulfilling was a sense of individuality, which is so much more than the aesthetic look of the shoe. It was actually feeling right in your shoes and feeling right in yourself, which is the essence of being individual. So can we have another slide? Sorry. Thank you. So comfort is key. Maybe another one. Thank you. And also aspiration. So I look into what, inspires or motivates individuals to buy the sneakers that they do. And there's obviously the mechanisms and power of branding, which we've talked about tonight, which is so important, but the power of influencers as well as a real kind of icons. And obviously, the sneaker can, in this sense, example here, can fulfill something about that individual's lifestyle. So maybe just a couple more, please. Thank you. So yeah, there's another aspirational shoe. Their influence from popular culture is really key. And maybe just one more. Thank you. So when I look at my findings overall, I see the significance sneakers have in fulfilling individuality, fulfilling confidence, comfort being so much more than the comfort they are on the feet, because comfort is that safety in oneself. You feel right in your shoes, you feel right in yourself. And there is so much more in terms of values, stories, memories, relationships with friends, and so on. So in the context of sustainability, looking at my data and thinking about why these shoes mean so much to these individuals, it gives a real sense of what it is that drives the consumption, drives experience of wear, and those values that are so important to understand in the context of sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi. Thank you. I will hand over to Daniel, who will talk us you're joining us from Zoom. I don't know where you're joining us, Daniel.
Hey, nice to meet everybody. My name is Daniel Neveda. I am joining you today from Los Angeles, or actually Ojai, about an hour and a half north of LA. I'm usually based in Brooklyn, New York. I'm a native New Yorker, which I'll speak a little bit to. I didn't design any slides specific to this, but I have a bunch of talk points that I will get through in the essentially allocated 5 minutes. So I'll jump right in. Professionally, I exist at the intersection of advertising and now editorial. I grew up in New York City, in Queens, New York, which has now become sort of like the epicenter of cool culture and streetwear culture. And I make my living as the owner of a commercial and documentary creative company that makes advertising and films. So throughout my journey, I've worked alongside a lot of people who played a guiding role in the success of streetwear. And I've noticed throughout that journey and the explosion of the sneaker market specifically, that there's a general lack of commitment to the goal of decreasing the environmental footprint on the planet. You know, everyone just wants to make the cool collaboration, but no one's really thinking about what we need to do and how we need to sort of like decrease consumption. We've got ourselves into an insane hype model and this culture of drops, weekly drops. So that's where I thought I could use my sort of knowledge as this world of advertising coming up in, you know, the streets of Queens, New York, and combine all of those things to look at it through the lens of creative storytelling and how do we inspire people through marketing, which is what, to Michaela's earlier point, the Air Jordan originally did better than anything else and started this whole entire cascade of overconsumption. How do we use that idea of great marketing to sort of move the needle culturally and have people care more about environmental responsibility? I first started an Instagram account as a hobby called the Air Vegan, which is the intersection of my plant-based lifestyle and my passion for sneakers, and just sort of tried to convince people that there are cool plant-based sneakers, there are cool animal-free sneakers that exist in the market. You don't have to walk around with burlap sacks on your feet to promote veganism and have no sense of style, etc. And once I saw the success of that and the engagement was through the roof, I decided to launch an editorial platform called Future World, which I call the antithesis to hype beast and hype culture. We put up one story a day. We talk a lot about the evolution of bio-based materials. We only promote products and projects that care more about their level of environmental responsibility and cool culture. And through that platform, I've been able to experiment with the audience. And some of those experiments have been around material transparency. Some have been around this idea of modularity becoming more important in footwear, which I'll talk a little bit about more. And even the use of a pre-order model to decrease the amount of overconsumption and hype that goes into these drops, these weekly drops. Manage supply chain, manage the amount of product that gets created, et cetera. So some of the things that I have noticed, and I'll just sort of touch upon quickly because of the amount of time that I have, are that the industry needs to start looking at a model of degrowth, which no one ever wants to hear because everyone cares about the bottom line and their dollar. But if you look at some early sort of practices of degrowth, you'll see that companies are finding that they can maintain a level of profit while also decreasing the amount of product that they make by making longer lasting product and engaging consumers on what we've learned is a habit of being comfortable spending more for higher quality garments, understanding the transparency of those things and feeling better about how they vote with their dollars. So degrowth is the first sort of like big thing that we have to try to convince sneaker brands to look at. I believe in the power of collaboration. The explosion of the industry has happened through high profile collaborations. And if we can convince some of these big, high level designers to look at collaboration as an opportunity to talk about decreased environmental impact in production of sneakers, if people make it cool to say that, hey, this new collaboration was, has a lower carbon footprint, et cetera, then people will feel more inspired. If you look at like, Travis Scott or, previously Virgil Abloh revolutionized the hype around sneakers. If some of those projects had a little bit more of an environmental responsibility lens, I think the culture would adapt these ideas. I think we need to regulate material transparency, which I know that you all care about, and I think is a huge thing. If people can actually see the same way we look at nutrition facts, if we can see what's in our sneakers, we'll be able to make better decisions. I think that onshoring production is a huge hurdle that we have to look at as well. If you look at how the supply chain has been affected, Nike, recently said that they might not be able to deliver product until spring of next year for some of their retailers. And, if we can onshore production, make it more equitable in markets locally to produce sneakers, that'll be helpful. And again, creative storytelling, I think, is the biggest sort of tool we have in our toolkit. If we can inspire people through advertising and marketing, we can move the needle, and we can, leverage the passion of this community, which is obviously through the roof, and turn it into advocacy. And that's where I see an angle for all of us. And that's what I'm hoping to do, is to use the extraordinary level of engagement that people have around sneakers to turn these people into advocates for greater social and environmental change.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you. Last but not least, I have Jessica. Thank you.
Yep. Hello. I'm Jessica Saunders, and I'm from London College of Fashion. And my research is really based in electronic textiles and how we can legislate to manage the potential waste stream that electronic textiles will create. That policy also takes in textiles, and it takes in nanomaterials, and it takes in electronics. And being asked to come and talk about sneakers made me think, well, hang on a minute, that actually applies to sneakers too, where the regulation around how you make them, how you produce them, how you throw them away, is practically non-existent. You can sign up for voluntary standards, but there's nothing with any teeth. It's only the electronics world where there is some actual legislation that says you must recycle X amount, you must begin to do curbside recycling. And even though that exists, it isn't actually that effective, in that globally only 17% of waste, electronic waste, is actually recycled. And what I've been looking at is how you can actually go back to the drawing board. Where does legislation need to be effective? So I'm looking at principles of design for disassembly, so that we actually have legislation in that arena, so that you have to, as an inventor, sort of inventor responsibility and producer responsibility comes back to those that are inventing and making and producing things, actually have to be able to say to you as the consumer, this is what you do with this thing, this garment, this sneaker, in this case, this is what you do with it. We will take it back. We know how to recycle it. We have the technology. We know what to do with it, and then we'll make it into something else. Or your sneaker can go in your compost bin, and that's fine. So I think there's a lot to be said here for this kind of policy coming across textiles, electronics, and in this case, shoes, because it's been so unregulated that you can just produce anything. It doesn't matter. And what we're now doing is trying to clear up our mess. And if you can go back to where it kind of started, it actually makes people think, well, do I need to use that material? And in fact, what it'll do is provide a platform to invent new ways to glue your sneakers together. A lot of the problems with recycling is about the glue that you use. It's little things like that, and the small pieces that you add, or maybe it's the color system that you use. And actually, you just need to think about it at that end. And equally, that comes back to what you're saying about labeling. You want to know on your label where it's come from, what parts of it are dangerous, and actually the instructions on how you throw it away. So that's what I'm looking at as to how that can work. But I'm in electronics world, electronic textiles world. But actually it really does go across, I think, into other products. And I think it is coming. I think inventor and producer responsibility is something that is coming. Certainly in France, they've started this where the producer has to provide, is taxed, as it were, to be able to be responsible for whatever they put out there. So I think it's coming. I think it will help. But it's having teeth. It's having the infrastructure. And equally, as people are having to invent ways to produce things that can be recycled, it will also push the invention of how to recycle things. Because not only is it a problem, for example, I've got recycled polyester trousers on, but a lot of things are made where, for example, if something is just polyester, you can recycle it. But if it's cotton and polyester mixed, then it's very challenging. So why are we still making things that have these combinations of materials? So what we need as well is much more innovation in the recycling and recovering end. So it's the kind of, it's the bookends of the life of your product that I think will be really, really important going forward. And that will give sneakers a, you know, in the future, they may be the thing that are the first things that become this totally circular kind of product, if they've got the money and the will to do it. And it is actually, sneakers are very, very, as we've heard, very consumer kind of led, and actually things are swung by what consumers think. So as consumers are becoming more and more aware that they want to know the transparency and the history, where it's come from, what factory it's been made in, what part of the world, how far it's traveled before it's got to your foot, and then what you do with it. So I think the demand from consumers is very, very strong in this world. And again, it's the narrative and storytelling around that that I think will make a difference, but that hand in hand with really definite policy that everyone understands, particularly in kind of the inventing and putting product out there world.
Thank you. So we're opening up for 15 minutes of Q&A. If you're joining us online, I do have a question here as well. But my colleague, Henry, you're not passing around. Are you passing around the microphone?
Yeah, I'm walking around.
So if you have, so if you have questions, there is a stick with, sorry, I've never seen this before. There's a stick with a microphone so that there's no contact. So raise your hand if you have questions. We have a lady there. Please don't hit anybody.
Hi.
Your name?
Vaishakhi Sengupta.
Yes.
I'm from a food manufacturing background, lead on sustainability and stuff. Really keen to understand, because there's no silver bullet to get to net zero. This is really fascinating, talking about circular economy on fashion and stuff. And it's true, it's probably a commodity that is so widely used. Of the brands that we see on the high street, which top 3 brands would you say are really accounting for their greenhouse gases or taking steps on their sustainability strategy, so that if we are to talk amongst our peers on, which brands to go for, then which ones would you recommend?
Okay, I'll take one more question here. So one is the top 3 brands on accounting on greenhouse gas. There's a lady here. Your name, please?
Hi. Thank you so much for such a very rich panel. I have a sort of question and a half, particularly addressed to you about the labeling. One of the things you talked about is labeling about where things come from, what's in them. And will that include also the carbon footprint of every material of the design stage, so life cycle, labeling? And will it include things like the regulations? Will they include exactly what you talked about, not mixing things that can't be recycled, and also making things in such a way that you can retrieve the ingredients, as it were, the components better, so that you actually can dismantle a product and recycle things more easily?
I have a question here. So I have 3 questions. So we have a question for Patrick, our colleague. And that is actually to Daniel. Really pleased to hear you mention the need to reduce overconsumption of footwear and the need to degrowth the sneaker industry. Is there any brand which is already actively considering degrowth as a strategic business model? So there's quite a lot of questions linked to brands, recommendations, and also greenhouse gas. Who wants to take them?
Brands, Daniel, that might be more your
Sure. Yeah.
in that area.
Yeah, I'm happy to address these. I sort of live in this space, for better or for worse. So Allbirds has done, and this sort of speaks to multiple things that we've talked about here, but Allbirds has taken strides to release their carbon score with their footprint, with the release of sneakers. They're actually putting it on the boxes. They just did a t-shirt, that came out alongside one of the collaboration releases to sort of promote this idea of caring about the carbon footprint. As much as I commend that sort of transparency, if you will, there is not a lot of clarity around to a question that just came from the audience around when that traceability begins. So they're scoring it from whenever they decide to score it and not being super clear on when that begins. They're not giving full transparency around the traceability and when that process actually starts. And so what's interesting is that 25 years ago, Nike worked on a project called Nike Considered, which was about minimizing, which is exactly what we're talking about here, minimizing the amount of materials and pieces and components that are in a shoe, making it, as being able to trace the supply chain as much as they can. And they cared so much about the carbon footprint and the carbon scoring of this. It was an experimental project. It went on for a few years. They ended up not being able to move the needle in the culture, in the sneaker culture at the time. And so they disbanded that team, and that team went on to develop Flyknit, which ended up becoming 80% less impactful as a material used in sneakers. So it was useful, but we had a marketing failure. We actually had Nike spearheading this with the Considered project, which there's information on, and some of the incredible sneaker designs, a sneaker that was made out of a single shoelace that was woven together using classic techniques and old techniques to make something new. So yeah, so Allbirds is doing it. They're just not super clear about it. Nike cares about it and has really sort of looked at traceability from the beginning of it, but they're slightly uncomfortable releasing that information because they don't want people to poke holes in them and beat them up over our perception of whether they're doing a good enough job in relationship to when in comparison to like the wild west scoring that Allbirds is doing. So that sort of answers that. So Allbirds is doing a good job of it. Nike is working on it. And I believe in the next year, they'll probably start to be a little bit clearer about that carbon scoring. And on running, on clouds, if anyone's familiar with that brand, they've just released a project as well that we just spoke about on Future World that speaks a little bit about the carbon scoring. So I would say those three brands. Adidas is always working in this space as well, but there's a lot of holes that get poked in some of their transparency initiatives as well. So did I answer that question in a way that was satisfactory? Okay.
Thank you, Daniel. There was a question on the labeling, where they come from. What are the information that needs to contain on that? Would you like to pick that up?
Yeah, what information is contained on a label? The sky's the limit in a way, and it's what initially you could bring in that was palatable but makes a difference. So I think it's very much about what to do with your shoe when you throw it away. So that leads to, well, it's made of this can go here, or the whole thing can be taken back to the store and they will deal with it because they have the technology, they know what's in it. So I think that will be key. I don't know that being able to say the carbon footprint of every single little component or type of material in there would just be so onerous that it would be too difficult to do. But I think understanding where the kind of distance traveled in a way, and what you're talking about onshoring, can it be made in a more kind of sustainable way where factories are all together rather than different places across the world. But then that comes back to workers' rights, it comes back to how much people are paid, and then the bottom line is how much will people pay for a sneaker, how much can people pay for a sneaker? But I think in labeling terms, I think you want to be able to understand exactly what's in it, what that, how toxic that is if it's in landfill, and then what you do with your shoe with that knowledge to be able to dispose of it. Yeah, I mean, I think at the moment the regulations you have to say where something comes from, the country of origin, but that's where it was finished and put in a box. It doesn't tell you all the stuff that happened before that. So it's just, that's where it came from, is where it was put in the box and then came to you. So finished off. So it can be literally where the label's sewn in, or the lace is put in, for example. So, at the moment, that's what you get. And you know what it's made of, but you don't really understand what to do with that or how that can be recycled, if it's recyclable. Lots of people don't understand what is and isn't recyclable. You know, it's very, very complex, and we're making complex things, and it's like, yeah, great, that works, or, you know, but no one's really had to think about what to do with it at the end. So it will change, it is coming. So I think that will become part of what you have to do as a producer in the not too distant future.
Thank you, Jessica. There's a question from the lady and a gentleman there on the back. So the lady here and then the gentleman.
Can I just ask, Jessica, you talked about the difficulty of cotton being mixed with, what was polyester. This is actually critical, because if I don't know for everybody here, but if you have a natural fiber and you wear it, your sweat is far better absorbed, whereas if you use pure plastic all the time, I mean, I cannot wear what I call plastic-based polyester type clothes, because the feel of them, everything is so. Which is the easiest to recycle? Would the natural material, is it essential to have the polyester, the nylon with it? I mean, I know nylon is utterly critical in so many ways, but then if that means by mixing it that you can't recycle it, or there's terrific difficulty, in a way it's a challenge, isn't it? I mean, yes. It's a huge challenge for the whole world, and there are inventors out here. I'm full of hope. After all that talk, I'm full of excitement about what you're going to be, what the future, because that's got people thinking again, and that's very exciting. So I'm hoping for great things. But anyway, sorry, the question is, what's the difficulty? Why should one material, which is the best to recycle and which is the worst?
Before you answer, there's a gentleman just behind. Yeah, there. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Johan. I'm the founder of a sneaker brand called Roskomar. And my question is, because it's clear from the conversation thus far that there's a huge amount of complexity in all of this, from supply chain to logistics. I think you used the phrase, we need legislation that has teeth. Whose responsibility is it to improve our industry? I mean, and I guess it's two questions. Whose responsibility is it? And who do you think will actually drive the change? Because that could be different. Is it consumers, brands, retailers, legislators? Who needs to take ownership here? That's my question.
Big question. And then a gentleman there. Oh, sorry. I'm a gentleman there and then the lady there.
Hi, thanks very much, everyone. I'm Joe. I'm working in a startup accelerator on new ideas around the climate crisis, not specifically on the fashion side, but really interesting panel. I had sort of two questions. The kind of area I'm looking at is consumer behavior change more generally, and particularly thinking about how we can do that with coming generations and how that can have wider influence. So this might be more for Daniel, this first part, but you mentioned things like subscription models and approaches to degrowth. How do you make lower consumption or better consumption cool? That's sort of the first question. How is that going to be about? Is it about sort of making sneakers that can be reskinned by the consumer so that they can be this season's sneakers? And then secondly, and this might be more for Jessica, is there any kind of innovative technologies that might be part of that? For example, could you kind of see a future where you've got the approach you have to Snapchat or Insta being applied to your sneakers, so that you don't need to have new products, but they're still customized, or something better than that. I'm sure you've got other ideas. Thank you.
Thank you. And then last question there, and then I'll close this panel. And then,
Hi, thank you. This is actually a fortuitous question coming off of that. I was thinking about social identities and how that kind of ladders to sustainability. I'm an anthropologist working on regenerative design specifically, so I had a question for Naomi around, is there any sense right now that identity and sustainability are coming hand in hand with people wearing sneakers? Is this already a latent desire, or is this something that, say, an advertiser has to educate that people should want this or could want this into the future? I was curious, like, how much of that it already exists.
So who wants, there was a question specific to you, Jessica, and then there were like open question on whose responsibility and who will drive change, and then some question to you. Also, how do we make lower consumption cool? So
yeah, so starting with what's the best in terms of recycling, we have the technology to be able to recycle cotton on its, you know, in quite a sophisticated way. So you can use any cotton, but when you speak to recyclers and you speak to anyone running any type of recycling plant, they always go, can you not just think about it before as you're designing something so that you're not just dumping it on our plate? But I think, you know, polyester is easy to recycle and it's there and it is, although in certain instances it may not be so pleasant to wear. But I think it's the,
I think there was a.
Went wide.
There was a.
It's Radio 4.
Sorry. There was like, thank you.
So I think in terms of recycling at the moment, it's adhesives that are tricky. It's anything embedded, some things with nanomaterials, some you know, titanium dioxide and things like that that are meant antibacterial, and probably when in terms of nylon to help stop body odor and things like that. So that's tricky. So I think at the moment it's pure fabrics are easier to recycle than anything that's mixed. And that's where the real challenge is. And that ends up in landfill. And then when you're talking about electronics, if you ever have, you know, we'll have electronics in our sneakers telling you how far you've gone, how the pressure on your foot, and in the future potentially. I mean, Google are wanting to make all our electronics so you don't even know they're there and they're so integral to what you're wearing. But then throwing all of that kind of stuff away is a real issue as well. So again, there's a point there where if you can start inventing the dismantling process as you're creating these things, hopefully you haven't got that problem at the end. You're not just throwing things out there and hoping someone else will work it out in the future.
Thank you, Jessica. So there's a question on whose responsibility and who can drive change. Who wants to pick that up?
I think that's part of the thorny supply chain, who's in charge, you know, who has responsibility. And I think consumers can play a big part because they'll start asking questions and brands will want to respond. And then, you know, the power of social media, we can feel that sometimes social media is quite negative, but actually the power of social media where your customers are sort of talking about you and going, well, actually it's not, oh, did you know that you can't, oh, did you know that this one is vegan? You know, and this trainer is, oh, they use only vegan leather, or they know where their leather comes from for theirs. And, you know, people do talk, and it is beginning, people are really wanting and demanding, and the young especially are very, very aware. So they do have that kind of power, and it's how quickly the brands will listen, but then be able to put the infrastructure and the money in to make it so they can kind of answer that, rather than some nice greenwashing where, look, we have recycled quite a few plastic bottles, but it's only a small percentage of what we actually sell, but it looks good on our website and it's very prominent. You know, so yes, they're trying, but it's really not answering the bigger picture. So I think governments and, you know, as we know, we've just had the massive climate summit, and actually governments are equally responsible, and they've given themselves the responsibility to lower carbon footprint, to try and avoid waste. You know, a lot of governments are committed to the theory of circularity, and that they're reusing and trying to be less wasteful. So I think it is that, you know, I guess there'll be a tipping point where everyone will begin to take responsibility, but we'll probably need somebody, a government or whatever, to actually really take that forward. But I think, you know, there's groundswell from people, you know, from the public, and we're all here, we're all in this sort of situation together. So I think everyone has responsibility, but yeah, I guess it's who will when profit is ultimately, you're a company. I was going, well, you're a company and you should be doing it. But you're like, well, I have all these people that work for us and we have to be successful because we need to keep employing these people. So it is highly complex, but I think there will be a tipping point, and I do think government should be talking about it. And actually standards and becoming, policy can rely on standards that actually have to be implemented rather than just voluntary, which is a lot of what we've got now. So that connection between policy and standards and regulation and how you use them and how they're implemented is really important, and that is where governments can make a difference.
Thank you. I'm eating into panel 2's discussion. So Naomi, you have 1 minute, and Daniel, if you have 1 minute for just to reply to how to make,
So in terms of my research, you asked about social identity and sustainability. In the last year, I have definitely seen quite a change with the teenagers I've been interviewing, where they are actually talking about the shoes as more sustainable, and actually that's part of their identity. They want to project that they have more sustainable, conscious values, and they're very proud of them. And so that's a definite change I've seen over the last year. And also I've seen possibly a change in a slightly different way in how they value and care for their trainers. So they're less disposable, perhaps. They want to keep them, they treasure them, they're caring for them. And certainly when I've seen teenagers that I maybe interviewed 3 years ago and seen them again, they still have those sneakers they wore, for their first interview. They are keeping hold of them. So whilst maybe that's not the solution, there's a sense of a value there that's important to think about.
Daniel.
Yeah, of course. I want more than 60 seconds, but I'll try and do what I have to say in 60 seconds. The thing that's crazy is that this whole culture of this explosion is based on, what used to be cool as individuality, and we've gotten so far away from that. We now exist in a copycat culture. And when I think about individuality, I think there's so much potential with the idea of mending and repairing your sneakers and looking at a sneaker as a modular item. We did a thing on running, and myself as a runner and a marathoner, you can burn through a midsole, but the upper of the sneaker is totally in perfect working condition. If we were designing sneakers with end life cycle in mind and the concept of modularity, we could be replacing that midsole instead of having to create an entirely new sneaker over and over again. And when I think, this question about whose responsibility is it, it's the climate conversation is a great analogy. We've watched government pass the buck to other people. Now let's leave it to the advocates. Oh, let's move it over here. The brand should do it. It's like, it has to be legislation where time is up on this with sneakers as well. And yeah, the consumers can move the needle, but it's lame to put the emphasis on the consumer. We want the sneakers to be more environmentally responsible. The brands aren't going to do it because they're not going to make money off of it. It's time for legislation to step in. Brands need to get on board. Sneaker brands have made enough profit over the last 25 years. So it's time for everyone to sort of think about the planet and future generations. So there's a little more than 60 seconds, but got a lot. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. Round of applause for our first. All right, thank you for joining, for those who answered it. So now I have a second group of panelists, and we also have, sorry, I should have asked your name, Yin-Yum? Is that correct? Yin-Yum Ling joining us online. Then we have Emily and Mohammed, and then Rachel. So sorry, I'm so sorry. Yin-Yum, would you like to start first? Joining us online, and also where are you calling us from?
Hi everyone. Yep, so my name is Yihan Lim, and I am connecting also from Los Angeles in California. I actually just relocated here about earlier this semester to join USC from MIT. So today I'll be sharing the work that I've done at MIT Design Lab with their team there in collaboration with Puma on the Puma Biodesign project. So let me share my screen. Yep, so I'll be discussing the project that we did with Puma for the past, since 2017. So it's been a 3-year-long collaboration project, which we focused on exploring the topic of how can you create an adaptive and dynamic sportswear. So trying to look at ways of really engaging these different experiences and values. How can we create a sneaker or shoe, a sports shoe that can be adaptable, that expresses identity, that's efficient, productive, also has a playful engagement factor, as well as thinking about wellness and safety for the user. So all of those are kind of the values that we have been exploring through the lens of different materials here. So from looking at aesthetic materials, using jamming, pneumatics, or embedded electronics, shape-changing materials, as well as biodesign, we have been exploring the use of both microelectronics as well as living materials or shape-changing polymers to create these different type of experiences. For today, I would like to focus on the use of biodesign and how we have looked into looking at the future of dynamic sportswear. These are, when we say biodesign, we think about, microorganisms is one example, right? We drink bread, we drink wine, we eat bread, there's algae around us. So we're surrounded by these microorganisms. So it's nothing new. It's a way of going back to those materials to use as an ingredient, as a material to create these novel materials that we can bring into objects that we use or products that we use. So in doing so, our design team have collaborated with bio-designers, bio-prototypers to understand both what it means to design a product with biomaterials, microorganisms, to understand what is a growth media that we have to consider, what is the input, what is a mycobacteria or microorganisms that we have to think about, what can be this media, the media of the design, as well as what are the possible applications of those. How can we sense, how can we actuate, what's the output that we want to create? So in collaboration with BioRealize, a startup working in the bioprototyping platform, we created 4 experiments looking at a deep learning insole on the bottom right, also the carbonators, trying to use algae to create a t-shirt that would respond to the different air quality levels around you, adaptive packaging, creating an adaptive packaging material that would biodegrade over time and it would conform to the shoe itself. And finally, the breathing shoe, an adaptive shoe that will create a custom breathing pattern to the user. So from these 4 experiments, I'll focus on the breathing shoe since we're talking about sneakers. In this breathing shoe, the shoe itself is made of biodegradable material that is patterned with microorganisms. So think about the upper sole of the shoe, how it's molded with a cavity pattern in which the cavities are then filled with the microorganisms that we selected and also its growth media, the gelatinous media. So when you are wearing the shoe, the shoe would respond to the heat level of you as a user, and it would start to activate the growth, the bacteria, and then have it to consume the different parts of the shoe within the canvas. So imagine that over time that your shoe will form to you, depending on unveiling your, let's say, your breathing pattern or your sweat pattern of your shoe to create a custom ventilation pattern. So that was the concept that we have generated. And also through other collaborations with the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany, as well as Innovation by Design in Milan, and the product has also progressed further into the next iteration of the prototype to look at the form factor and also to really explore how it could be further developed into a hopefully a feasible shoe, a shoe that can be actually produced and be tested out with the users. It's still in a conceptual phase, but as you see in this video, the more that you use a shoe, the shoe will become more like you. So it would respond to your heat patterns, your sweat patterns, and then over time, the shoe will evolve to really express your body, your identity. So that was kind of the idea that we wanted to convey, both using these biodegradable materials as well as a way to have the shoe to sense your body, actuate through your body to create this customized and personalized experience. So through this, I think some keywords that came out from this exploration was to is the idea of the bioevolution. How can we use biomaterials to create evolving products that's unique to yourself? And also that has a component of self-manufacturing, leaving the last process of the manufacturing to the user so that the user can customize and complete that manufacturing process. A couple of additional slides to look at. So this could be, this is a heat pattern of your upper. We were looking at different materials to see how it can actually biodegrade over time. So looking at possible materials, using including starch, PCL, PLA, and other materials to see how it actually biodegrades. And then kind of testing out different patterns to see how we can actually reveal the unique, let's say, heat or sweat pattern of the user through that. Some of the key questions to
1 minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and thinking about designing experiences, how we can use our body as an interface and use our microorganisms to sense and actuate. So I think the very last slide I have here is for us to think about how we can redefine the relationship with the products. So a product of sneakers, as we talked about, with so many sneakers being produced, if these sneakers are alive and it's a living product that we have to take care of, how would it redefine our relationship with the products, and how maybe it can also inform us about new ways of living with such consumer products. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. I have now Emily, who's been working on a really cool design, holistic.
Yes, I also have some slides prepared. Yes, yeah, so I'm coming from background in material design, so I'm not fashion designer, but a material designer, and I have been involved at the Institute for Material Design for the last 5 years, first as a student researcher, and then later on, or for the last 2 years, as a teaching assistant. And next slide, please. And yeah, there I have been exploring not only textiles, but also many other different materials from ceramics, glass, but also cellulose-based and other biomaterials. And during those projects, I learned a lot about like different digital design, parametric design methods, but also additive manufacturing processes. Because I think material design can also be a big driver for sustainable innovations. And the quote says, designers can lead this process by combining the technical and emotional aspects of material development to create richer, more meaningful and future relevant product experiences. And I think what's interesting about this quote is that the material can be like the fundamental starting point for product design as well. Because by designing materials, the expression, perception, and the impact of the sensory characteristics, like also the tactile experiences with the materials, can be designed and evoke emotions in the interaction between the user and the material itself. And next slide, please. But what we are also here for is not only materials, but in general clothing. And we all know that a large part of clothing is being disposed of after a really short period of time. So it's 73% of clothing produced globally that ends up in landfill or is incinerated. And also sneakers are among those products. And next slide, please. And it is the complicated construction of sneakers and the use of many different synthetic materials that makes it almost impossible but unprofitable to disassemble and recycle a pair of sneakers after its use. But sneakers are also an interesting product beyond its material composition, but also because they're used across generations. They have to fulfill many complex functional requirements. And there's also a product which is emotionally attached. And in my final thesis in product design, I was asking myself whether it is possible to design a sneaker using natural renewable materials that can be produced locally and on demand, and at the same time meet the cultural need for individual products. And the outcome of this material-based research is Sneacher. And Sneacher is I also brought the prototype here. It's a portmanteau of the words sneaker and nature, and is a bio-based and biodegradable sneaker. Next slide, please. It is made from 3D knitted dog hair, which is a waste material that is collected from private households. It's also called Shingora, and there I cooperated with the company Modus Intarsia, who supplied this material. Then we have a transition area, which is made from natural rubber, and a sew made of mushroom mycelium. And the next slide, please. And through the experimental process with natural materials and textile processing techniques, I developed, next slide, please, a biological material cycle where the used materials are incorporated with suitable additive manufacturing processes for the sneaker. And there you can see, for example, on the bottom left, where the upper part of the sneaker is made using the raw material, the dog hair, which is then carded, spun into yarn, and 3D knitted for the upper part. Or on the bottom right, where you can see where the textile is then immersed into natural rubber and forms a water repellent part of the sneaker, or for the top part where mushroom mycelium is shredded, mixed with vegetable waste, and then 3D printed, forming the sole of the sneaker. And next slide, please. And here you can see like a small overview of all the materials that I use, waste materials. I experimented with using different processing techniques, like trying to spin it to yarn, or knitting, stitch bonding, or trying to felt it. Next slide, please. And compared to a conventional sneaker is only made of 3 materials, reduced to minimal components. And it is, like said before, the mushroom mycelium, the transition area of natural rubber, and the 3D knitted Shingora. Next slide, please. Then I have some images from the process where I went to a spinning mill in Germany to transform natural raw fiber to a spun yarn, which you can see on the top 2 images. And then I also went to a knitting lab in the Netherlands who helped me program the upper part using the Shingora. And I have also on the video, which is upstairs, there's a lot more about the process seen in more detail. Next, please. Yeah, and interesting about the technique, the additive manufacturing of 3D knitting, is that the final knit is already 3-dimensionally formed, so it creates no waste when it's being produced. Next, please. Yeah, and a sneaker is not intended to be a final product, but rather a framework within, and the user can customize the sneaker in various parameters, such as the size, the material, or the pattern, and create a product that can be then produced in microfactories or in maker labs nearby. And the next slide, please. Okay, this one is also, yes, I'm almost done. Yeah, this one's also broken, but next one, yes. And I think that especially in design, a holistic view of materials, manufacturing processes, participation of the user and the environment is necessary in order to implement products as part of a resilient and sustainable manufacturing system. And yeah, even if sneaker is not yet a finished product, I believe that design has the ability to show also a vision of how products or like sneakers could be produced in a more sustainable way in the future. Thank you. And I have one more slide.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have Mohammed, and then we also have Rachel, and they can tell us more about what they have been up to, Design Museum. So Mohammed, you first, and then Rachel.
Sure. So yeah, my name is Mohammed. I'm the founder of Sneakular, and so that comes from sneakers and circular. And what I'm trying to do is design and develop the circular economy for sneakers. So you know, what does that mean? We want to start off with repairing, reimagining, and rescuing used all the way up to end-of-life sneakers. And we are very early stage, so I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the journey that we're on, you know, where this idea came from, where we are, and where it's going, hopefully. So yeah, essentially 9 weeks ago, I joined the Design Museum with just an idea. This idea had been one of those ideas that kind of just doesn't go away in your head for a while. And I joined the Design Museum's Entrepreneurs Hub, which is an accelerator program for design-led businesses or business ideas. And so, yeah, if I talk to you a bit about where the idea came from, I play basketball, and I'm also very passionate about the circular economy. So, you know, what tends to happen is I run through my shoes, and usually, you know, a single component may not even completely fail, and then I'm left wondering if I can, you know, perform with these shoes because, you know, I have no grip. And so my mind just starts to, you know, wonder and question, is this really the best that we can do? And so, yeah, I guess also sort of leaning into my background as a civil engineer, and, you know, we apply systems thinking. I design wastewater systems to keep the, you know, our developments and stuff running. And just imagine if we had to go back to throwing out our personal waste out the window, you know. And it's a shame really that some of the products that we use, that same thinking is applied. Waste is an essential part of the design process, but right now it's actually, you know, we should really see waste as a design flaw by people creating sneakers. And so, yeah, I mean, we've all had that painful moment when our own sneakers start to break down, and then we have to think, what am I going to do? And I'm sure everyone, you know, people in this audience, you probably have a few shoes that you've thrown away, or even they're still under your bed. And so, yeah, essentially, that's you know, that's where it's come from. And over the last 8 weeks, we've really been getting a lot of support with pushing that forward. So I've been exploring lots and lots of ideas, and essentially talking to, you know, I've been speaking to cobblers, I've been speaking to charity shops and consumers, and really trying to understand the problem, because it's the problem that I'm obsessed with, not the solution yet. And so, you know, when you speak to cobblers, they'll tell you about it's really difficult now to not, you know, people come in, they're used to just having shoes, and shoes are fairly simple, but they're coming in with sneakers, and they're made up of so many different parts. And actually the value in a pair of sneakers is fairly low compared to, you know, well-made leather shoes with, you know, welts that can actually be taken out and repaired. And so, you know, the business model, I think somebody mentioned business models earlier, it's very difficult because, you know, the repairing is essentially being, that cost is being offset onto or externalized by manufacturers onto cobblers or the consumer. And yeah, charity shops, if you go to your charity shops and you go downstairs to, if they let you, you'll see whole reams of shoes that people have given away. And so that's where the sort of repair, reimagine and rescues come from. I think it's roughly 40% of clothes that are thrown away are just thrown away because people have gotten bored of them. And, you know, same thing, similar thing can be extended to sneakers. We need to, you know, find ways, economic ways to repair, reimagine and rescue our trainers. And so, you know, this is an amazing product, by the way, Seeing Sneaker. So we've been exploring as well. When I say circular economy, specifically for sneakers, we're thinking as, you know, products and services. And so the products, for example, my sneakers right now, they're wearing at the bottom. You know, I want to be able to buy a pair of replaceable outsoles, but how does that fit into this wider circular economy? Is it a biodegradable outsole, or is this something that's recyclable? And then all the issues that come in from there. And the same thing, services, providing services to individuals. Obviously, that means they have to incur the cost. But again, designing a system that makes it easier in the future to continue to keep the sneakers in life, and ultimately, you know, just changing the way that we value our sneakers.
Thank you. Thank you. And then we have Rachel, who, so the Design Museum had a sneaker unbox exhibition. It's no longer going on, but there is a video upstairs that you can watch while you're having a drink. So Rachel.
Yeah, so I was the assistant creator for the exhibition Sneakers Unboxed, which was meant to open actually in May 2020, but because of the pandemic, it got postponed. So it was kind of almost 2 years in the making. And I don't know how many of you might have already been to the Design Museum, but really our kind of core purpose is to make the impact of design visible and the value of design visible. So we program within kind of 3 core strands. From a curatorial perspective, one of those is design for an expanding audience. So building awareness, I think, Michaela, kind of awareness was a big, I guess, a keyword I picked up on in your brief. So we tried to build awareness by appealing to a general audience, and I would say Sneakers Unboxed fitted into this strand, definitely. And the purpose was to, I guess, give an overview, and it definitely speaks to what a lot of the other panelists spoke to before, kind of presenting that cultural, social history of the sneaker as a style element, and definitely a consumer-led product, and then showing actually its humble beginnings, if you like, as performance footwear, and ending with a look particularly at sustainability, because of course our perspective, we do want to try and ultimately we are talking to the consumers. The visitor most likely already owns 1 or more pair of sneakers, and we want them to leave the exhibition not only understanding the history of what they're buying, but also give them maybe some agency in how they can change, and acquaint them with new brands that are looking into this. So that was also interesting. It came up in the questions before. I think, for example, Veja is a brand that has, with very little marketing and really on the catching the zeitgeist of all of our awareness now, built a very strong brand and transparent supply chains, and ethical or innovative materials are at the source of what they do. In that last room also we had what we called the robot, used by Adidas. It was really, the full name is Futurecraft Strung, and it kind of sat between knitting and weaving material. But that was a very interesting thing, because it really created an integrated design and manufacturing environment. So it cut down on the number of stitching. It also allowed people to program from different parts of the world without having to ship prototypes here and there. So that was a kind of interesting, and it's only used by Adidas. I think other big brands are going to start to try and use it. In terms of other smaller brands, we included examples from Native Shoes and Wrens, who actually use recycled coffee grounds in their uppers. And again, also, I think this definitely speaks to some of the topics we were talking about, and Mohammed, your project as well, the idea of kind of wanting to find new value in, or kind of salvaging what you might already have, and reusing. And you might know a designer called Helen Kirkham, who we had in the show, who there are these charity shop bins where you can leave your sneakers, but often the pair get disconnected. And if that happens, she collects them and kind of makes these Frankenstein-style sneakers using different bits of different shoes, and it's a kind of made-to-order service or offer. But we also wanted to highlight upcyclers, so very small outfits like Addy Cogs, who is just one guy in his kitchen in Leeds, and you send him your pair of Adidas specifically, and he will re-dye, or kind of very specialized ways of caring for your shoes to give them a new lease of life. And Stella McCartney, on the kind of higher end, has actually eliminated glue completely from some of the sneakers in her collection, and I think very cleverly, although it doesn't suit many budgets, I don't think, but you can kind of, the collection speaks as a whole, so you can buy one pair and maybe put the upper of one onto the sole of another. So I think that's quite a clever, maybe we could see that start to trickle down. So, and the idea of kind of consumers taking care of their shoes, and we took a lot of care to show that throughout the history of the sneaker culture, because as I think a panelist before was saying, in it really does hail from kind of New York specifically, and hip hop and basketball, and there was a real pride in wearing your sneakers, and even a whole subculture of walking around with a toothbrush, so you could kind of make sure your shoes were box fresh at all times. And that ethos, I think, is still alive today, and we're kind of nudging people to take it on a bit more. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have about 10 minutes for questions from plenary. Questions? There's some really no? Oh, there's your name, please.
Hi, I'm Byford from Climate Change Think Tank. So my question is about durability. So we talked a lot about being recyclable, being sustainable, but obviously like longer duration, if the sneakers can last longer, then it has a lot of benefits in terms of sustainability. So I'm just wondering, in terms of the material design, like how much investment or how much interest is there from brands in terms of investing in more durable sneakers? Obviously that perhaps that might go against their financial interest, but I'm just wondering how much investment is going into the kind of investing in the more durability of the materials.
Okay, question on durability. There's a gentleman there, a lady, and a lady here.
I was just musing that 700 years ago, people used to make shoes out of deer, which are now one of the most favored environmentally friendly sources of material. And they would get them dyed with natural ingredients, and they'd remend them during their lives. You probably only have one pair after your feet had grown. So we have some things of the past. This is a policy think tank. How are you going to make this stick? I mean, it's all good fun, but how are you going to make this work other than by taxing the heck out of the existing products? Thanks.
Question. How do we make them stick? There's a lady there, and then there's a lady in front.
Really pleased to hear about the plant-based alternatives. I wasn't aware that such alternatives are available, especially also the fact that Stella McCartney is not using glue. That these things I don't think are available in the public domain in terms of information for wider consumers to make a choice. So following this, I would request that you sort of like either use it in your blog or something to publish so that the younger generation and other people who will probably link in from social media are aware, especially in the run-up to Christmas when people will be buying gifts and stuff, so that they can use their, the buying power to make the sustainable choice. Secondly, about legislation, and I don't know if this is wider information available, there is a new piece of legislation called Sustainability Disclosure Requirements coming in through the FCA next year, where brands will be required to do a bit of carbon labeling disclosures. So I'm hoping that the brands and other things that we're talking about now, the commodity sneakers or any other commodity, that the greenwashing stops and people are able to see not just it as a reporting mechanism or a taxing mechanism, but for wider consumers to make a choice.
Thank you. Remember, lady.
I just want to question about social sustainability. I'm fascinated with what was presented here. And you mentioned about distributed manufacturing, maybe open design, maybe a question of copyrights, like making things locally and the design a bit more open. So it could be through digital fabrication produced locally because it's more available, the technology is available. The future is here, is not evenly spread, that is the quote. So how do you see in your research the aspect of social sustainability and capacity building locally to produce the goods, not just so much towards the material, but how the manufacturing of the product can actually impact not just environmental social sustainability, but also the social sustainability, and this issue with copyrights that threatens the brands. Yeah.
Okay, there are a couple of questions. Who wants to take the question on social sustainability?
Social sustainability. Yeah, I think because what's interesting about like participatory design is that, of course, it's not open design. It's not unlimited numbers of possibilities where you can choose how your sneaker is made, but you have certain parameters. And I think it is possible using like parametric design, because there it's getting more and more easier to generate different patterns automatically, for example, via a website, where you can, as a consumer, decide which colors, which patterns you like from a range that is given, and which can be then also automatically produced using, for example, the 3D printer or the 3D knitting. But of course, it is at the moment, it's not that we are ready tomorrow, because the technology is like starting. We see there are a few pop-ups who are like promoting on-demand production, but also at the moment it is quite expensive still. But but I hope that we are having more possibilities to involve the user in the design, but also in the production, because I think, because we were talking earlier about value, and I think if you're involved in the design and in the production with a product, it has also greater value for yourself, because you understand the effort that has been behind the product. And I hope that we're doing more in this direction.
Who wants to pick up the question on durability, or how do we make it stick?
I can pick up the durability one. I would argue that, you know, different companies will have different sort of things that they might be trying to optimize. So if you look at the way that a lot of sneakers, or if we were to be more specific, football boots or shoes, the direction they've been going is, it's like the manufacturer might decide to optimize for you know, lightweight, to go for lightweight design, and then what that results in is, you know, more kind of sleek looking seams and finishes, which actually are less robust and are prone to opening. So I mean, I think generally though, like you said, durability is in conflict with you purchasing more. So I think, you know, it's difficult. I don't know, you know, I don't even think there are actually, so actually there's a basketball shoes data set that sort of ranks the shoes in terms of durability. And I don't know, but then when you go further in terms of repairability, it starts to, you know, the data doesn't really exist yet. But I don't think it's as important as other factors in the design.
That's interesting. I have one more.
It's just another question. It's just to say that there's a shoe company that actually takes shoes back and resells them for you for free.
Okay.
They're so durable. They're very expensive to buy to start with, but it's not a sneaker. This might be wrong.
Yeah. So we have 1 more minute, and then we had a question from the gentleman back there about how do we make it stick other than through policy. And there was a comment from the lady as well who wants to take it. Or I can take it. You can go for it.
I don't want to start sounding like a Veja brand ambassador, but they do also offer, and at one point we were looking into it actually to have it at the museum, a kind of drop-off point where you can take, but it's only for that brand, and they would go and mend it for you. And I see that happening in Toast. I think that the fashion brand are also doing that, where you can, and I think COS has a kind of archive re-buy back system. So there are, I think that's moving in that direction too.
There are different business models around it. And I think I'll pick up on the question on the you know, as a policy think tank, what do we do? And I think it's a combination, right? We do need regulation, but regulation sometimes take a really long time to be designed. And then obviously there is the voluntary standards and then how industry as a whole move. But I think this is why we started the whole conversation around consumer and lifestyle, because consumer, especially consumer-facing brands, consumer have such a strong power to tell, you know, send a message to the brand. And I think so there is quite a very significant work that we should be doing around consumer engagement, and then Daniel's point about storytelling, and then see why consumers need to be engaged and asking the question, right? So like when we started, like when Michaela started saying, how about we doing reinventing sneaker? And I didn't even think about like sneaker actually really matters and all the complexities around it. So the whole point about a conversation like this is for you to kind of leave this conversation thinking, oh, other than, I don't know, what is the greenhouse gas emission of the steel? Let's also think about what's the greenhouse gas emission and also the life cycle impact of a pair of sneaker, which is part of our everyday life, but then actually has really, really long, complex supply chain issue, but also has it kind of embeds into how we think, our lifestyle and all the choices that we make as consumers. So with that, thank you everyone. Round of applause to them, and then to you.